Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to be here and appreciate you taking the time to listen. Before we jump in, I wanted to briefly introduce myself and my company. My name is Ben Vinograd, and I'm the head of Europe for CleverLeaps, a US-based, NASDAQ-listed multinational producer of medical cannabis with a focus on B2B partnerships. My own background, I'm a lawyer by training. I came from investment banking, and I got into cannabis a bit by accident. But I've been in the industry since 2017, and I've been focused on Europe since 2018. I got started by overseeing the development of my company's Portuguese operations, where we currently cultivate high-THC flower. And that asset, in addition to our EU GMP certified extraction facility and supporting cultivation in Colombia, make up our company's production assets. And we have offices in the US, in Colombia, in Portugal, and we also have an office in Hamburg, which is focused on medical and regulatory affairs, as well as supporting our commercial efforts. The topic that I've chosen today is heavily informed by my company's experience over the past 5 years. Through that time, we've been focused on developing not only our physical assets, which include 18 hectares of cultivation in Colombia, an EU GMP certified post-harvest facility, an EU GMP certified extraction facility, the 1 hectare of GACP cultivation in Portugal, with EU GMP capabilities to come online next year, but also, most importantly, making sure that we have the experience and the expertise to work. Can you hear me? Maybe I should stop moving, sorry. To work with partners around the world. Through this time, we've learned a lot, and our company today is focused on providing product and support to our partners throughout the world at all stages of the production process and helping to ensure a high quality, consistent, and accessible global supply chain. This includes product development, regulatory support, product registration, and however we can help share our experience and expertise. I want to start by looking at the evolution of the European market. And in my approximate eras of cannabis in Europe, the nascency stage, this was characterized by specialized players within the industry selling to the markets as they existed at the time. A company like Bedgercan, which we heard from yesterday, of course, and is still independent, and a company like Pedanios, which was acquired, which very quickly brings me into the second stage of development, total integration, vertical integration. This is approximately from 2017 to 2019, and Europe was beset by companies that wanted to own the cannabis sector and do everything themselves. It was led primarily by well-funded Canadian operators. This had a number of effects. First, valuations of cannabis companies that already existed in Europe skyrocketed, and a number of new individual companies or assets were planned and put into place to try to capitalize on those valuations as well. All of this was held up by the expectation that there would be astronomical growth to come and that the European market would, to a certain extent, mirror that of the North American markets. 3 facts, in my mind, are relevant for explaining the end of this era. Growth, while present, has not been what people had originally expected. Second, European cannabis, like cannabis everywhere, but European cannabis is complicated and it's tough. And third, this particular approach takes a lot of scale, it takes a lot of capital, and it does take a lot of time. The ugly truth is that for most, this has not met the expectations that were originally put in place, and ambitions have had to be scaled back. Finally, we get to the current era, characterized by 2 important facts. First, the first time that there's actually the ability to truly source externally, and second, a different business model that's being put in place. The new generation of cannabis companies, and this isn't to say that the vertically integrated companies are no longer present. Of course, they're major forces in the market. But the new generation of cannabis companies tends to be a bit more locally focused. Experts or aspiring experts in their local markets, in their local products, whatever it may be. There are some regional aspirations, of course. There are partnerships, and there's also a model that we're seeing a bit, which is relatively close to the multi-state operator model that one sees in the US, where there are relatively autonomous state-level offices that are all part of an encompassing company. The question is, what's next? Right now, we are seeing, again, interest from North American companies that are well-funded cash flow positive companies, US multi-state operators, that are eyeing the European market as an expansion opportunity. Whether they'll go for a vertical integration route, they'll go for partnership, has yet to be seen. I bring this all up because, in my view, it's important for any participant in the market to understand what is driving this change. The business model for the cannabis industry is not fixed yet. And at least personally, I believe that it is due to the tension that we see, the natural conflict that will happen between the global industry as it develops as a whole and the local and regional requirements. Getting into the actual body of my presentation now. When we look at the development of the cannabis industry globally, it's gone from single-state experiments operating solely within domestic borders, and will eventually hopefully become characterized by the relatively free movement of goods from market to market. Today, we are still in an in-between stage. On the positive side, there's a continued trend of legalization, resulting in the development and entry of new producers and the creation and maturation of new markets. Thinking of just the European market, and I think I've seen this slide or a version of this slide maybe 10 times over the past day or so, product has made it, soon make it to Europe from Canada, Latin America, Australia, Israel, and multiple countries within Europe itself have traded across the world. More and more sources of supply are being built and will be entering the market as the cannabis industry starts to develop a truly global supply chain. So overall, we have an increasing set of products, an increasing set of alternatives with hopefully an increasing level of quality and sophistication. On the other side, the number of potential markets and the complexity of those markets is growing. The challenge is matching these two and bringing product to market. Whether you're a multinational, regional, or local player, all of these issues will exist. In my mind, as I've shown on the slides, there's three major overlapping forces that define the challenges in each market. First, regulation. This isn't the most insightful comment, but regulations vary and they're really, really important to our industry. There may be market leaders like Germany who set potential standards, but overarching regulation without the harmonization of regulation or cannabis-friendly legislation, as we heard yesterday morning, individual regulators have the freedom to pick and choose what regulations they put in place, and this adds to the complexity. Regulations are evolving. Meeting these different requirements, meeting these different specs is costly and it's time-consuming and requires intimate knowledge, not just of the base of production, but all of the various end markets. From my own company's experience, the list of certifications that we have and will have has grown and will continue to grow. Colombian GMP, EU GMP, GACP, IMC GAP. As every market decides to raise the bar or copy from other markets, any producer is going to need to have multiple certifications, and not having the right certification, if you're trying to source from someone, means that the product isn't relevant for you. Wherever you are in the chain, you need to recognize this complexity. For suppliers, it's absolutely essential to understand local market regulations and incorporating multiple end market specs into the operations. Product development takes time. The bar is constantly being raised, and the playing field is always shifting. For local market players, people sourcing externally or globally, ensuring that a supplier has the capability to meet and adapt to your needs is absolutely essential. Understanding that standards differ in various markets, that they're applied differently in various markets. Pharma is pharma, but pharma in one jurisdiction may be slightly different than pharma in another jurisdiction is absolutely important. And again, product development takes time. Everyone wants, at a current point in time, the same product. That product will take time to get to market from a production point of view and from a registration point of view. Second, market maturity. While markets on average over time tend to develop in similar fashions, at least so far, what that market looks like at any given point, what the regulations are, what products are demanded, the complexity of the products that are demanded, or the discernment of those products, and the ease of entry into that market and the partners that are available will all differ, and those all evolve at slightly different paces from market to market. Here, it's important to take into account the stage of development of the market today and whenever you think you can get into the market. Markets in some ways develop quickly. Patient preferences, prescriber preferences, those types of requirements evolve relatively quickly. In other ways, I'll use the example of since 2017, 2018, people have been talking about an oversupply of flower for the European market, where 4 years later, that still hasn't necessarily happened. It still seems right on the future. It's very hard to judge what's going to evolve at what pace. And finally, if you're looking at a market, a younger market means that people will still have to figure out the pathway. The partners that will be available will be less prevalent. The pathways that they'll be able to use will be less prevalent. Even the regulators won't have the same experience. In a market like Germany, which is more mature, there are partners, there are pathways. It's easier to enter that market in certain ways, but at the same time, if it's easier for you, of course, it's easier for others as well. And finally, customer preference, patient preference. What I really mean by this is the people that are influencing the prescription and purchasing decision. At a high level, this is driven by, first, regulation. What are they allowed to get? Second, what have they historically been able to get? And what I mean by this is, have they actually had a choice? If you're looking at the data and one product is doing great, is that because of the third, their actual base preferences, or it's just what's actually been available for patients to receive? So here it's important to understand what's currently acceptable and what's driving it. If you have a 2-year lead time to bring product to market between product development and registration, it won't be the same playing field as today. And if you're producing the product that's good today, it's not necessarily going to be relevant. So making sure to have the ability to develop or source the products demanded today and in the future is essential. CleverLeave's approach to this, we're fortunate enough to have the scale and scope to have people in all of our most important markets. In addition to the offices that I mentioned, we have my colleague in Israel who will actually be speaking later today on the Israeli market. We have a colleague in Australia as well. So between Latin America, in Canada as well, Israel, Australia, and Germany, we have people in all of our end markets that are there gathering information, interacting with the market to be able to create a feedback loop that we can incorporate into our global regulatory, into our product development, and into our actual production. But not everyone is able to have people in every country, and that's where choosing your partners wisely in country and externally is quite important. To better understand this confluence of factors, let's look very quickly at the German market. I'll only pick a couple of pieces from this, but let's start with regulation. We're in Germany. As we'd expect, the German regulation is fulsome and it's well thought out. But I'll point out 2 quirks that do impact the market. Quirks may not be the right word. First, as we've heard a number of times, cannabis is only allowed to be sold as a magistral formulation here. What's important about that? Magistral formulations have their own pricing scheme, which directly impacts cannabis's ability to be competitive versus the black market for patients who are not eligible for reimbursement. This absolutely changes the dynamics if that was not the case. Second, regulations, depending on which one, some of them are at the national level, some of them are in the purview of the states. This presents opportunities and it presents challenges. Outside in, depending on your business model, there is not necessarily one answer that is applicable for certain questions in all different jurisdictions. If you are a supplier into the country, if you have a client in one jurisdiction, that product itself may not be interpreted the same way in another jurisdiction. However, if you're within the country, you can understand that. That can be used to your advantage. You can do, for lack of a better term, forum shopping. But again, an opportunity and a challenge. Oops, sorry. On the maturity aspect, on a scale from no cannabis to Canada, Germany, somewhere in the middle on the more mature side. With this maturity, as I mentioned already, comes clear pathways, clear partners. People have done it before. Not everyone is able to do it easily, but there is a path forward that needs to be built from scratch. This maturity also means that there's sufficient exposure to products and choice of products to influence demand. And this gets into the last point, the preference or demand aspect of it. And I'll focus on 2 of the 3 questions that I posed on the prior slides. What have patients been able to get? Mostly flower, mostly high THC flower, mostly limited supply from a few major partners, and historically an inconsistent supply. What is the market generally demanding today? consistent, scalable supply, a choice of products, and quality. And quality I'll break into two aspects. For anyone who's from the pharma industry, there's the pharmaceutical aspect of dry flower, for example. There is also a consumer aspect of it that I'm lumping in with quality, which I'll get into in a second. To dive into this a little more, quite a simple slide, but I break down the demand generation into three groups. True medical users. These are people who want and require or need and demand access to cannabis to improve their quality of life. These are the types of people that generally the cannabis programs are put in place for, people who have no other alternatives. What demand do they generate? Yes, they want the highest quality product, but some cannabis is better than no cannabis. Group two, let's call them true pharma. These are people that aren't necessarily interested in access to cannabis by itself. They may be interested in cannabis-derived medicines, but they want to see that there's a specific therapy that has data to support the efficacy of that therapy for a specific indication. This is where people believe the market is going in the long run. Although I personally believe that all these three segments will continue to exist. And finally, I call it crossover on the slide. I'm talking about pseudo-recreational users. These are people who legally qualify for cannabis use, but they may have other factors that influence their decision. To get into this is what I'm talking about, more the subjective quality. When it comes to dry flower, a crossover user, for example, may not just look at the THC level. They may look at the terpene profile, not necessarily because of the medical benefits, but because of the smell, for example, bud size, color, all these things that may not have anything to do with true pharma as we think of it, but are important if you're entering the market and understanding how purchasing decisions are being made. If we look at these three segments and how they impact the evolution of an industry, of a market, or how they come to be, the market at first is going to be driven by the medical users. This is what the market was created for generally, to give people access who absolutely need access. At the same time, you'll likely have some early adopters from the crossover segment, people who are very excited to have legal access to cannabis under any condition. In this phase, without adequate supply or adequate choice, anything that meets the basic requirements can and likely will be sold. There are a number of markets where getting any cannabis in, it will move, simply because there isn't enough choice. As choice increases and starts to compete, for example, with the black market, more crossover or pseudo-recreational users will transition if they can access the medical scheme. At the same time, as more data, whether this is clinical trials, preclinical trials, or even anecdotal observations become more common, true medical users and more pharma users enter the space and drive that segment of the market, but they all have potentially divergent demands. So I've spoken at a high level about two markets, but as we know, many markets are opening up. Many people are looking not just at Germany, where we are today, but European and the global markets as well. For every Germany, for every Israel, there's the UK, Poland, Czech Republic, Luxembourg, New Zealand, and Portugal. To bring product to market, whether in a big or small market, mature or immature, firms must overcome the competing quality standards, certifications, stabilities, DMFs. They either need to have the capital and scale to do it all themselves, or they need to work with reliable partners that can provide consistent, high-quality goods and services and have the runway to be a partner, not just for now, but for the future as well. At the same time, those working with these partners must separate those with big ambitions from those who are able to execute, which can be difficult when there are limited track records across the industry. None of this is easy, and these types of partners don't necessarily always exist. However, as time has gone on, more and more credible partners have and will continue to become available. I greatly appreciate all your time, and thank you.